Now, you may or may not know that I love the Maze Runner series. I've watched the movies and read all the books. This was the series that got me into reading as kind of a hobby and into the sci-fi genre. It's my favorite and most nostalgic series. Now, in 2022, James Dashner, the author of the series, would go on to release the beginning of a sequel trilogy to his original series titled The Maze Cutter. I've done a review video on the book a year ago and a review to its sequel, The Godhead Complex, 5 months ago, and now on September 9th, James released the third and final installment of the series, The Infinite Glade. And in this video, I'm going to give my review on this book, my thoughts, opinions, likes, and dislikes. This video will not only contain spoilers for this book, but the previous books and the entire original series. So, there's your warning. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So before we get into the characters and story, we need to discuss the format of the story because that affects a lot. The Infinite Glade follows the same format as its previous two books. It tells its story through multiple views of characters. You'll see perspectives from either Isaac, Mino, Sedina, Alexandra, and others. In The Maze Cutter, I thought the format was executed poorly because it disrupted pacing, caused exciting moments to be cut off, made the story more confusing to follow, and it seemed to take away time from development of certain characters. However, in the Godhead Complex, the format was, in my opinion, executed greatly. It didn't seem to disrupt the pace too much, the story felt easier to follow, and the characters had their moments and were more likable and relatable. The thing with both of these books, the perspectives would be told from 5 people or more. However, in the Infinite Glade book, the story is told through only 4 perspectives. This is a great change because it made the story much easier to understand, and it didn't feel so cluttered with so many characters. Now with that being said, let's look at the story. Now, we follow 2 different plot lines, and one plot line would be told through the 2 perspectives of characters, and the other plot line is focused from the other 2. So we have the Cure plot line and the Godhead plot line. The Cure plotline is focused from the perspectives of Isaac and Jimena, and the Godhead plotline focused from Mino and Alexandra. From the perspectives of Isaac and Jimena, they had just escaped the villa that they were at, and they run into 2 brothers in the wild that used to work with Kletter, the lady that had picked up Isaac and Sedina and the other immunes from their island to bring them to the villa to develop the cure, and is the one who died in the first book. However, we learn that the cure is not the cure that the islanders have thought, but a cure for the people that Wicked had buried underground in civilizations before the solar flares and the Maze trials. The families of the Gladers, or Sequencers, were preserved, and their genetics and way of living had severely changed. But now, since the world outside is changing and there are people outside that are alive and living in a safe haven, and the sky and the world is changing for seemingly the better in cases, it was time these people knew the truth and were let out. So the mission changes from there. The cure is for the young people of that generation so they could have a chance to survive. This would be the supposed evolution that is actually the second plot line that is focused by Mino and Alexandra. Mino and Alexandra's perspectives are really fun to read because the 2 are bitter enemies, but they have to work together. Basically, Mino is against the Godhead because of her false ideology and her evil doings for power and for progression. It puts the people that he grew to care about at risk. Mino witnesses Alexandra murdering the headmaster of the Remnant Nation, but he couldn't say anything or kill her because Alexandra had more information that he needed about this evolution and cure, and causing conflicts would make it much harder. Alexandra is aware of Mino's knowledge as well, and this forms a deadly rivalry between the 2, which is intriguing to read because they have to work together while Mino tries to get rid of her and Alexandra tries to manipulate him to be her guard. There's the summary of what happens, and I'll discuss it more in detail in a little bit. But throughout the story, 2 plotlines are being told from different perspectives, and it's interesting. The trilogy evolves from a cure for mankind to being just this certain cure for this group of people for this specific purpose. It's like the restoration of humankind, but not in the way we would have thought. James throws in these twists that at first make no sense, and that's how it's supposed to be, but when you think about it and really understand it and reread it, it changes a whole lot of stuff. In a lot of ways, it's good, but in some ways, like what the plot revolves around and changes to, it seems weird and kind of, I guess a close word to how I felt would be incongruous, and I think that's how it's supposed to be, but it doesn't change the feeling. And with that being said, let's talk about the characters. Now, I'm going to focus on our main characters, Isaac, Jimena, Mino, and Alexandra. Starting with Isaac. In my last 2 reviews, I said that Isaac was my favorite character. He's the guy that shouldn't be here. He's not related to the past Gladers, but he ends up being here because he's friends with them. And it's relatable, and you can really understand him because of how out of place he is and feels. And I think it's a good start because I thought that this character had a lot of potential to kind of grow into this leader type where, despite not being related to them, he still has the ability and becomes this type of successor to Thomas, being this kind of like great leader. And I saw a little bit of that in the Godhead complex, and I hoped it would have flourished in this book, but his character is just kind of the same. And there were a couple times where he actually kind of annoyed me, like when he recklessly tried to take control of the Berg, which was dangerous and stupid, and it just made me sigh. What he goes through and his emotions about everything, like, I understand and I hold nothing against that, but I was hoping that we would see some development with him. He does some things like reasoning with others in moments for sure, but there's also these other moments like one I just mentioned that just makes these good moments not really remarkable. He's still good to read, but it felt like his character didn't really go anywhere. Next up is Jimena, and she is really good to read as well, and a lot of it is because of her relationship with Isaac. The two kind of had a rough start meeting, but as the story goes on, the two learn about each other more, and they kind of become good friends that care about each other and look out for each other. Reading her portions about how the truth needs to always be told, and it should always be at the surface, but the situation she's in, she chooses to go against that. She's basically contradicting herself, and it bothers her so much, and this reflects upon Isaac as well. And this is also explored with the fact that Jimena stole the quote-unquote cure from the villa, and she kind of holds it as her own weapon because it gives her leverage, some kind of control in a world where seemingly nobody is in control. It's her way of making sure things do go the right way and not sideways to more death and destruction. However, as she goes along with Isaac and all they go through, she has to let that cure go despite how unsure she is. Me personally, I was hoping Jimena and Isaac would develop into something more since it was the vibe I got from the last book, and I think this book could have used more moments where Jimena and Isaac get to know each other and bond over the similarities they have, like the loss of family. Next up is Mino. To be honest, Mino's portions are always good to read, and to be honest, I think Mino's perspective shines the brightest in this book, and I'm considering that Mino is my favorite character in the story. Mino is a character who is cold. He was raised in the Remnant Nation where their training and methods are brutal. He doesn't understand human emotions. He never had a real connection with anyone in his life, never a real connection with another human being. So through the first 2 books, he's bonding and forming these connections, and we see him grow to care for these people, especially Roxy, who becomes a mother figure to him, and in this book, Roxy calls Mino her son, to which he is very joyful about. But then when Alexandra comes along, he sees how evil the Godhead is and sees how she's manipulating Roxy and his other friends, but of course he can't do much because it further complicates things. It'll further cause distrust in him, and because information is needed about the cure and the evolution, he can't kill her. Now, Alexandra is aware of this, and this forms a deadly rivalry between the two. Mino decides when it would be best to kill her off, while Alexandra is trying to manipulate Mino into becoming one of her servants. And this rivalry causes Roxy and the others to doubt Mino, to distrust him, and question his motives. Initially, they would be right because Mino originally wanted to join the Godhead, but after seeing the truth, Mino changes. And this doesn't just carry over to his friends, but the soldiers of the Remnant Nation that now branded him as a traitor. But in the end, he goes from being a traitor to being a leader once he exposes the Godhead and offers soldiers freedom from this brutal and evil and imprisoned lifestyle and rallies them together. It's this mental battle between Mino, himself, and the others that make his portions beautiful and entertaining to read, and see how he overcomes them and unites people is awesome. And finally, Alexandra. In the first book, I hated reading her portions. In the second, I loved reading them, and I'm happy I loved reading them again in this book. Alexandra's portions focus on her struggling to maintain her images as a goddess. Bit by bit, her image falls apart, and we see the lengths that she goes to in order to preserve that image, in order to maintain her power, attain more power, and move the world to the evolution that she highly speaks of. She is very egotistical, and it makes her the antagonist because she views herself as the true leader of the Earth when evolution takes place. And to gain that power, she desperately tries to manipulate Sedina and get her to form the cure from her blood, even if Sedina suffers for it. She doesn't care about anyone else except herself and the evolution. And again, what makes her parts more interesting to read is her conflict with Mino. Hearing her thoughts and emotions whenever she's focused on Mino makes it more interesting to read, and how everything just around her starts to fall apart and her plan starts to fall apart. They're all so fun and interesting to read, and some other characters didn't get that type of focus but are included because they drive development, like Frypan, Roxy, Sidina, and those characters. So there's a summary of the characters, the story, and my thoughts on them, which are the positive ones. Now I'm going to get into some of the things that I don't like, or some things that are just kind of First off, the crude language. Not a fan of it, and the way it's used is kind of childish. Second, the homosexual relationship between Sidina and Trish. It is a perversion to God's design for marriage and relations between a man and a woman. And in a writing sense, it's nothing more than the sake for inclusivity. It's not at all focused on, nor does it do anything for the story or the characters. It's unnecessary and a perversion of God's creation. Third, the ending of the book is something I'm kind of mixed on. The ending is an open-ended conclusion that is left up to the reader to kind of decide what happens. Concerning what the underground families decide where the Remnant Nation goes next, it is a good and interesting ending, but I would have liked it if it had more of a solid conclusion rather than having an ending that feels like there needs to be another book to continue the story. Fourth, there are some things that happen that we never even get a conclusion on, like what happened to Miss Cowan, Sidina's mother, for example, and how does Sidina react to that? What about the rest of the Villas? What about the rest of the pilgrims back at the maze? And this ties into the open-ended book where there are important things that happen that should have had a conclusion, but we don't get that. It's kind of the point, but still, it's just not really a good feeling. Fifth, I really wanted more references and callbacks to the original series. I said this before in my previous reviews, especially since the original maze is back and Frypan deals with grievers again. There's just this lack of callbacks and discussions within the book of the original Gladers. They do get mentioned, but not as much as I think they should. No discussion about the main protagonist, what he did, how he led, what he had to deal with, which could be done and used as an inspiration for Isaac to develop, but hey, that's just an example. Another missed opportunity would be when Mino and the other mutants are sent into the maze, the exact same one Thomas and the others were in, I'm pretty sure. So to have a lack of callbacks to the original series, which still could have been done, kinda sucks. Everything that happened in the original series is vital to the sequel trilogy, so to have the sequels not mention the original series and cast a lot leaves something missing. Sixth, and I think this is the last one, I also think that the Cure plot line never really went anywhere because it's what made Sidina very important, because she carried Newt's blood, which was speculated to be the Cure, but throughout the ending of the Godhead complex and the Infinite Glade, it wasn't, and it actually turned out to be Frypan, because Subject A3 was the Cure and Frypan is from that group and he was named Royalty. So with all of that, it leads me to believe Frypan is the Cure, unless I missed something, but it's not Newt's blood, which in a sense I wanted that, but also it doesn't get like a proper send-off or conclusion to that plot line and what it means for Sidina and her family and her history, along with the history of the original Gladers and the Maze Trials. Again, this can be tied back to the open ending complaint I mentioned earlier, but I still wanted to mention this. Otherwise, I think that sums up all of my dislikes about this book. All in all, as a finale, I think this book does a good job in more positive ways than negative ones. I think I would give this book somewhere between a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10, a similar rating I gave to the Godhead complex. And now the entire sequel trilogy is complete. Rating the trilogy as a whole, I think it would be between 6.5 or maybe a 7 out of 10. There are a lot of things I think this series could have done better, and it's hard to ignore them in favor of the positives that should be able to outweigh the negatives. I think this series could have done so much more to honor the original trilogy and their characters, and be better in terms of writing and the new characters. But those are just my thoughts. Feel free to leave your thoughts and opinions down below and I'll be happy to read them. Also, feel free to support this channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing my videos. It would be greatly appreciated. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching and I'll see you all in the next one. God bless.